I didn't do it. Nobody saw me do it. There's no way they can prove anything.
Welcome to Friday Fallacy. This week we're looking at Kettle logic. Kettle logic is when an argument contains mutually exclusive claims. That is, rather than make a single consistent argument, multiple inconsistent arguments are made. This is not a sound way of arguing, as contradictory claims cannot all be true. Even if two witnesses agree on who the perpetrator was, it doesn't make it convincing if they disagree radically on all other aspects. That Christians, Jews, and Muslims all think that a God exists in no way means that they support each other in that claim. Some examples of Kettle logic. There were no intelligence failures leading up to 9/11, and anyway, any failures were down to Bill Clinton. We weren't having sex in public, and anyway, we were behind a bush out of sight. The New Testament authors agree on many things. This proves its authenticity. But they also disagree, which is good evidence that it wasn't forged. Of course, the Holocaust never happened, and the Jews deserved it anyway. Many people have spoken out about their role in the 9/11 conspiracy, and the lack of evidence proves how powerful the cover-up was. Not all seemingly inconsistent arguments are Kettle logic. The most common valid use of mutually exclusive claims is what is known as arguing in the alternative. This is the practice of advancing several possible explanations, any one of which is sufficient. This is fairly common in law. For example, a prosecutor may argue that the evidence is unclear as to whether the victim died from their gunshot wound or from their stab wound, but since both were inflicted by the defendant, either way the defendant is guilty. Similarly, a defense lawyer may argue that their client wasn't at the crime scene, and, even if they were, they didn't have access to the gun, and that they didn't have a motive. What makes these examples valid arguments is it's not asserted that the mutually exclusive options are all true, but rather that only one of them is. That is, either my client wasn't there, or he didn't have a gun, or he did have a gun but no motive. Kettle logic is trying to claim that more than one of them is true, which is fallacious. Kettle logic is a kind of self-contradictory argument. That is, where the premises of an argument contradict themselves. However, the term kettle logic is usually reserved for the situation in which someone advances several independent arguments as all true, rather than a single argument which contains contradictory premises. For example, the basic cosmological argument that everything has a cause, and the cause of the universe is an uncaused God, is self-contradictory, but not kettle logic. On the other hand, an apologist who argues that the abundance of life on Earth is evidence for a God who values life, but who also argues that the rarity of life in the universe is evidence for fine-tuning by God, is using kettle logic. In this case, both arguments stand alone, but contradict each other. In practice, kettle logic can be difficult to pin down. Often, it's not clear whether someone is actually arguing that the multiple contradictory claims are all true, or that at least one of them is true. And, when challenged, it's easier to fall back into claiming the latter. However, even if formally valid, advancing several competing arguments in support of a conclusion makes it clear that they're uncertain about which scenario is correct, and is an indicator that their case is generally weak, not strong. That is, the need to include multiple independent arguments is a sign that none of their arguments are strong in their own right. It would be invalid to conclude that they must be wrong, but it is reasonable to be skeptical. In conclusion, kettle logic is when multiple contradictory arguments are made. Until next week, keep your fallacies to yourself.